Right, in this 5-minute code presentation, we're going to be looking at the use of tuples. So this program is going to have three different parts. Part one, we're going to create a function to display tuple info. And in that particular module, or that function, we're going to display the contents of a tuple. We're going to display the data type of the tuple, calculate the number of items that are in a tuple, and then take a look to see how many instances of a specific element is in the tuple. And then we're going to create a call function under the main function for my tuple underscore info, and we're going to pass 4 tuples there. If we take a look at our code template here, this is basically the tuple setup. So tuples, if you remember or recall from the learn and code component, they're going to be set up in brackets. They're going to be actually set up in parentheses. And this particular one looks a little bit weird. You're going to expect that we're going to get some kind of error on that one. And actually, we're not going to get an error because the syntax for a single tuple is going to have, or need to have, a comma afterwards. And again, we have parentheses, and since we're dealing with strings, the strings are going to be in quotes. Now, another thing that you might notice in the code, I no longer have header information for each of the parts. I'm utilizing now the power of the functions, and right now I have one single function that I'm passing parameters to. So I have 2 words that I'm passing through, prob and name, that's going to be displayed in the function. And down below here I have call functions for the message, and I'm passing these parameters: part 1 tuple info, part 2 merging tuples, and part 3 tuple operations. So as of right now, when I run the code, I'm just going to see the header information from the code that I've written over here. All right, so let's take a look at part 1 and start coding the components here. So here's the area where we're going to enter your code. So in part 1, we're going to create a new function called my underscore tuple underscore info, and the syntax for that is going to be this. Next part, we're going to display the contents of a tuple. So on our next line, you need to indent this. We're going to create a print statement. So here's an F string. Here is what is in the tuple, and I'm just utilizing a variable X to display the information there. Next one, print the data type. So again, we're utilizing keyword type to display what the variable is. My next print statement is we're going to calculate and display the number of items in a tuple. So that would look something along like this. The number of items in a tuple, and here is a keyword len for length. So get the contents, or how many items there are. And the next one here, calculate and display the number of instances of a specific element in a tuple. And this is actually pretty cool. So our syntax will be this. Get rid of the print statement there. So the instance of a tuple, I'm utilizing a word bird. So we're going to see if bird is in the tuple. And our syntax here, we're checking the variable, we're establishing a count, and we're identifying how many instances there are of the word bird. So again, up on top here, these are going to be our tuples that we're going to be testing. And you notice that in sample 2, we have 2 instances of the word bird. The other instances of the tuples, there is nothing there, so we should have a value of 0. Now, before the function is able to actually execute and work, under the main function, we need to call the tuple. So coming down below here in part 1, right underneath the header, we're going to make a call statement. So my tuple info, and I'm passing colors. So, So this is going to be one of the tuples. So you can recall from the above. So this is colors T1, colors T2, sample 1, and sample 2. So I'm going to create 3 more call statements here. Another one for colors T2. Then I have another one for sample 1 and one more for sample 2. Let me get rid of some of these extra lines. And now when we run the code, here is our output for part 1. So yellow was in one of our tuples there. It is a class tuple. Number of items was 1, and the number of instances here happens to be 0 of the word bird. Same thing with our second tuple. When we're looking at the functions and how the tuple is working, so when we look at this tuple here, so this is the instance for that part, and let me scroll up to the variables. So colors 2, we should see basically green and blue. It's against a class tuple, and there are 2 instances of that tuple, and that one piece of code, the instances of element bird, since there is no word of bird in there, it's going to identify as 0. And the next one here for sample 1, this is the output for sample 1. And sample 2, this is where it gets interesting because there's a lot more data there. So we scroll up for sample 2. Here's what's in the tuple, so it's displaying all this information in that particular output. Data type, well, we know that's going to be a tuple. Number of items in a tuple, so I counted out all these items. You can see that this tuple has a combination of strings and numbers, and that is a total 12. And then we have the number of instances of the word bird in there, and that happens to be 2 instances of bird, and that's how that particular function works. Alright, so now let's go ahead and take a look at what part 2 is supposed to do. So once again, we're going to create another function called tuple merge, and we're going to merge the 2 tuples of x and y together. So the 2 tuples we're going to merge in one instance is colors T1 and T2, and then we're going to merge sample 1 and sample 2 together. And then we're going to display the merged tuples and determine the data type of the merged tuple as well. So under this particular section here, let me get rid of some extra lines. This is going to write our part 2. We're going to start out with writing the function definition. So we're going to merge my tuple merge. So that's the name of the tuple I'm utilizing. I'm sorry, that's the name of the function I'm utilizing, and we're going to be passing 2 variables to that. Then one thing we're going to do is we're going to merge the 2 tuples. So this is one way of doing it. X plus y, because that's what we're passing through. And this is going to be a new variable that I call all elements. We're going to print all elements, and then we're going to display the data type that is of all elements. And down below in part 2, we're going to create the call function. And the way that's going to work is, here is my tuple. I'm passing colors T1 and colors T2 to the function up here. And in this particular function, X and Y are going to be representing the parameters that I passed of colors T1 and T2. And then I'm going to do another one here for sample 1 and sample 2. And remember that once we're under the main function here, to call other functions, and they all must be indented, as you can see. Now let's go ahead and run the code and see what the output is. So for part 2, when we take a look at the output, you notice that we have these new tuple that we created, and it merged them. And again, this is a class tuple, because when we're adding two tuples together, as we have here, x plus y, the system knows, all right, Python knows that x and y that we pass the parameters, right, of, let me see if I can get both of these in here. So these are the two tuples that are being passed into variables called x and y for this particular function. And since it's already knows that it is a tuple, this then is also going to be a tuple. So that's why when we get the output of tuple there, and the output of our next merge here is going to be a lot longer, and here is the output for that. Now, if you remember from the learn and code component that we cannot append information into a tuple, so the only way to manipulate a tuple is to create another tuple with the newer parameters. And then for part 3, we're going to basically create another function called tuple operation, and we're going to perform these following operations: display elements of a tuple, slice the tuple to extract some subset information, display the total number of items in a tuple. We're going to check to see if there is a word wolf and a number 9 in there, and see how many instances of a cat there is. So let me get rid of some extra lines above here, and this is where we'll start our code. So for this one, for part 3, we're going to start out with the definition of the function. Make sure, again, you're indenting correctly. We're setting up our print statement, display the elements of a tuple. Next one here, we're going to slice in the tuple. So we're basically utilizing items number 1, 2, 3 in terms of the slicing. We're going to print the total amount that is in the tuple. So again, we're utilizing the word length here, len. And then we're checking to see if the word wolf is in the tuple. So this is basically the syntax to see if wolf is in X. So again, because we're passing a parameter in there. And then here's another print statement to see if there is a number 9 that is in the tuple. So that's the syntax, check to see if there's 9 in there. And then I just have another statement. And this one, we're determined to see if there are how many instances of the cat. And actually, I need to change the syntax here of cat instead of bird. And then we're going to come down to, let me get rid of some extra lines in these parts of the code. And for number 3 here, we're going to set a call statement, and we're going to basically pass sample 2. So this is the data set that we're passing here for this particular function to execute. So let's go ahead and run the code. And yep, we got an error here. So line 57. Somehow when I was coding, I end up clicking on an extra parentheses there. Let's go ahead and run it again. And then here is our output for part 3. So if we take a look at the structure and step it through real quickly, I'm calling a function called tuple operation, and I'm passing sample 2. So our sample 2, we're passing this data set into this function, and this function then, when we pass it inside, we're utilizing a variable called x. So now in this particular function, that data set of sample 2 now is going to be identified as X. You could name it whatever you want. And then we're going to basically display the information. So in this case, we're displaying what the contents is in a tuple. This particular statement, we're slicing, so we're basically finding what elements are in positions 1 through 3. So you notice we have dog and bird. So we have, again, this is going to be 0, 1, 2, and 3. We're stepping through, and we're stopping at 1 less than the before. So that means we have dog and bird for here when we're looking at this particular syntax. So again, we're utilizing the len keyword to determine how many items are in the tuple. So we have 12. And here we're checking to see if the word wolf is in the tuple and the number 9. And we're getting a Boolean expression. So we have a false and a true. As we can see that we have the value 9 here. So that generates a true. And coming back to here, how many instances of cat is in a tuple? And we can see that we have 1 instance here. So the instances of a tuple is going to be 1. All right, so that is it in terms of learning how to utilize a tuple.